多元化的声音 Voci della diversità
разнообразие голосов
Voces de diversidad
የተለያዩ የህዝብ ክፍል ዘርፎች
نواهای
آواهایی از فرهنگ‌های گوناگون
Voices of Diversity.
Welcome to Voices of Diversity. The City of Bellevue is committed to cross-cultural understanding through the arts. Today, I'm standing in front of a statue of Guan Yin, which represents mercy and compassion. The statue was a gift given to us by the Bellevue sister city of Hualien, Taiwan, and was given to us after the tragedy of September 11, 2001. Today, we explore the rich cultural arts of the region, all on Voices of Diversity. I'm your host, Kevin Henry. We'll learn about the City of Bellevue's support for cultural arts. Activist and storyteller Delbert Richardson talks about his collection of African-American artifacts and memorabilia. We'll visit with Russian gallery owner Irina Gorgman and Russian artist Igor Koshinsky. We'll speak with Japanese-American artist Aki Sagabi about her work. And finally, we speak with Shub Gill about the festive style of North Indian dancing that she teaches throughout the Pacific Northwest. Up first, we hear from City of Bellevue art specialist Mary Pat Byrne.
In a city that's changing so fast, that has so many newcomers coming in, cultural arts are an incredible tool for us learning about each other and gaining understanding and respect and appreciation and enjoyment of each other. The art at City Hall was actually created as a group and to tell a story that unfolds as you move through the building. The first piece is called The Root. It's by Dan Corson, and it's a bronze piece. And I know it's hard to tell because it's painted silver. The initial idea for this came from an historic photo that Dan saw of Japanese stump farmers. In other words, to clear the land when Bellevue was still pretty much a wilderness, huge trees needed to be logged, and they were logged, but the stumps remained. And so the farmers pulled these up out of the ground. Now, as artists do, they start with an image, but where it takes them, is anybody's guess. And so as Dan continued to think about the beauty of the root, he also took in information about the design of City Hall and the purpose behind the design, which is to show a transparency in government. And so that made a very nice metaphor for this particular piece, because when you expose the root system, you're showing the system that supports the entire care and feeding of the tree. And so the transparency of City Hall in terms of the building and in service first all tie in together to create meaning of the piece. But there's also this idea of a journey. So we start in Bellevue's past with the root, and then we move into the building. And when you come into the building, the thing you notice is the floor of the building, this 12,000 square foot terrazzo floor created by Linda Beaumont. The name of the piece is The Current. So the idea is that as you move through the floor, the patterns are fairly turbulent and complex when you first come in, and then they kind of smooth out, and then they become more complex when you get towards the elevator core, because there's a lot of activity walking in and out. And then as you get closer to City Council chambers, they become more calm, and they lead you out onto the balcony. So you come into City Hall with your business, and then you move from the here and now very busy stage to the more contemplative, reflective mode, and the waters are calmer, until you come to City Council chambers, where you talk to council about your ideas. And then you move out to where the third sculpture is, which is you go through the doors and you go out to a viewpoint where you can see mountains and you can see pretty far out into the distance. And there's the compass. And the compass is it's about 51 feet tall, and it goes from the ground, which is 40 feet below, up to practically the roof that covers the viewpoint that you're looking at. And this is a compass needle, and it relates to the idea of looking out into the future. So you've moved from the past through the present day, looking forward into a vision of the future. But there's a lot of features about this art. So you look at this and you'll notice that the center disc form rotates, and there's a mirrored surface on it. So when you go in there, you may see yourself reflected back, but then it turns and you see another view. And that's one of the wonderful things about coming together as a community. You come in with your own view, but then you get to see other views as well that may change your ideas about where we should go into the future. We invite artists and arts organizations to bring us their ideas for projects, and then we have a small amount of funding that we can use to support those projects. We are really looking for those unique arts experiences that maybe are only going to happen once. Maybe they're a little bit experimental.
I'm standing next to The Silver Root by Dan Corson. Up next, we hear from a local man who tells a moving and often chilling story through his art. Activist and storyteller Delbert Richardson has been gathering African-American artifacts and memorabilia for the past 20 years. He has now created an exhibit entitled The Unspoken Truth that focuses on teaching children and young adults about the history of Africans in America. We recently visited the exhibit and spoke with Delbert.
A little over 20 years ago, my son's mom and I were traveling to Cannon Beach, Oregon, and we were impressed by seeing some items with black images. And come to find out, they were images that were used for advertisements in the early 50s and 60s. And from that point on, we saw an opportunity to teach our son a part of his history that's so important. My exhibit is about teaching the diaspora's journey from Africa to present day through a series of vignettes or short stories using authentic items and relics as well as artifacts with images that charts the journey from Africa, chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and Still We Rise. I call myself a storyteller. There's quite a few cultures that have an individual that they've entrusted with the oral history of their culture, race, and customs. His responsibility is to articulate that in word. So basically, me being a storyteller, I have a responsibility to share this information in a story form for children and young adults. As a race or a culture, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that we've allowed others to define us. And speaking specifically about slavery, slavery is a noun that basically is a person, place, or thing. And we were not slaves. We were enslaved. And one of my goals is to actually help change the mindset based on that statement alone.
Delbert created the exhibit especially for young people. He describes the tour he gives to African American children when they visit the exhibit.
I take them to the Mother Africa section, and the first thing I tell them is that you're from Africa and it's okay. Because one of the biggest disconnects I feel is Africa as a continent and African Americans as being in the United States. There is no difference. It's just a separation based on how we've been defined. Then I take them through the chattel slavery section, and at that point, I do my best to explain to them the difference between institutional slavery and chattel slavery. Institutional slavery is based on indentured servitude. If you and I were in a particular country, say Africa, we were both different tribes. If I conquered your tribe, you became enslaved. But at some point, you could work off your servitude, fold into my community, and even marry and have children. Your children would be free. Chattel slavery, which was developed by Europeans here in America, is based on one premise: the legal ownership of another person. Then we go to Jim Crow, which is what I call we're free on paper. And it's a very important transitional piece in our development and entry into the Americas, because we finally have rights, but yet and still there are many that refuse to acknowledge us as people and having rights. Then we go to probably the most important part of the entire exhibit, which is Still We Rise, which includes black inventions. And this is the section that I get the most joy out of, because to see individuals come in, young, old, to see these items and just their eyes open and say, I didn't know that, is what's really inspiring. This is one of my most cherished pieces. It's from Mali. And the reason why it's so important to me, because Mali was one of the richest civilizations known. It was known for its scholars and its major libraries where people from all over the continent of Africa will come and study. It is a terracotta figurine, and this also represents a skill set that was used in building America, because terracotta is nothing more than brickwork. So here you have a masonry person that eventually was folded into the Americas to do some building. This is the original real estate deed of an Afro-American gentleman who owned land in 1911, 44.5 acres, extremely rare for a black man to own land at that time. What you have here is what I call the Wall of Honoring. This is part of the We Still Rise section, and what you have is an assortment of items that were invented by black people. I think the impact is so great because we use these items every single day, and they never get the just due in terms of what they did. And this is probably the piece that I love the most. I have changed as a result of the process. I'm more sensitive to individuals of all races and colors because I believe there's an injury that's prevalent in all of us based on slavery, and there's some healing that must take place in order for us to feel better about ourselves first and also to accept others. If there's one thing I would hope that would be accomplished by the exhibit, is that there would be an honoring, that we would show a people of great perseverance, that there's some healing needs to happen, and we identify the injuries, we accept them, and start moving towards healing. And that's not just for blacks or white as well. And also, too, celebration. This is about a big celebration of a people from a great continent that haven't gotten their just due.
I am standing in front of The Compass by Alan Story. Next up, we find out the difference between art in the United States and art in the former Soviet Union. Irina Gordman started her gallery, Fine Art Vision, 5 years ago to promote and spotlight high-quality art from all over the world, with a special focus on European and Russian art.
So the history of art in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, is a very interesting topic. Probably I should start with the old Russia before the Soviet Union. So Russia was a very closed country up until the beginning of 20th century. So there was a Russian realism that was very self-contained, and there was no influence from European or any other traditions. And then at the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, there were a number of events in Europe, like in Paris, the ballet seasons in Paris in 1905, when the Russian artists were invited and actively participated in decorating Russian ballets, and that's how the European audience learned about Russian art, and Russian artists learned about the European artists as well. And then after the Great October Socialist Revolution in 1917, a lot of artists immigrated to the West, so basically they had connections. Those Russian seasons in Paris paved the way to Russian artists to leave the country. But the influence from European artists was very powerful at the beginning of the century. With the Soviet regime, of course, the doors were closed again, so there were traditions in Russian art that served the new government, the new politics. So it was Russian, the Soviet realism that promoted Soviet workers, Soviet farmers, Soviet style of labor, Soviet government. So it was the industrialization of the country, the Soviet life, because it was the way to, it was a weapon, a propaganda weapon. We have lithographs by Mikhail Shemyakin, and many people might recognize his name because he is one of a famous nonconformist artists who immigrated to West in early 1970s. So he was forced to leave the country because he was doing metaphysical art, and metaphysical art was considered kind of religious art. And since the religion was separated from the government, from the official politics, it has no right to exist. And so he was put into a psychiatric clinic for doing that kind of art, and he was almost imprisoned for not working because the art that he was doing was not considered to be a real job, and he was not allowed to exhibit. He was forced to leave the country, and he settled in Paris. Then he moved to New York because, of course, New York is considered to be the capital of the world, the art capital of the world, and he was very well. He was very welcomed there as well. He produced a great amount of works. He is like working non-stop, and you can see his works in public and private collections. And what's interesting about his art that he has done a lot of research. He has done great research on Egyptian art, on antique art, and you see that reference in many of the works, and he wrote about that as well, that his art was influenced by old traditions, old styles, by the art from all over the world. One of the major things for us to choose art is it should be high quality art. And I started with the artists who have been academically trained and who have a museum reputation, either in Russia or in Europe or here. And so we mix the artists with the museum reputation with the emerging artists.
Igor Kashinsky was trained in classical art in Russia. For the last 6 years, he has been creating and teaching art in the United States.
I can get inspiration almost from anything, from the book, from the movie, from a good conversation, from like nature. So it's a combination of many factors. And I lived like 20 years in Russia, so I got all this cultural experience. But main role is the tradition, classical art tradition, which I have and which I'm like trying to follow. And I don't like to be like strictly like Russian and like keep this like approach. I love to be open and accept new cultures, so I'm trying to integrate American culture with Russian culture on my canvases, like create some kind of mixture. So this is why I have like this little modern twist in my work. In Russia, people like to buy realistic approach to art because whole classical tradition is like we just only recently we're buying like modern stuff, but most of the time because people a little bit more conservative in Russia compared to US. In US, people a little bit more open, not a little bit, like it's much more open to different styles, and in US people have more appreciation for different styles and different artists.
Igor also teaches classes at the gallery.
It's quite an experience for me. I'm also getting some education from my students, and my students getting, hopefully, some art experience from me.
I'm standing in front of this marble food dog, which was also a generous gift from our sister city of Hualien, Taiwan. Next up, we hear from Japanese artist Aki Sagabi, who lives in Bellevue. Aki Sagabi has a unique artistic style called paper cutting. She has designed several public installations, including one of the Pigs on Parade series, displayed recently in Seattle. She has also illustrated and published 7 children's books. She can be found every year at the Bellevue Arts Museum's Arts and Crafts Fair.
When I was a middle schooler, I saw Chinese paper cutting illustrations in a newspaper. And then I always loved the art. I always moving my hand. So always, I had interested in something different or unique art. And then when I saw the illustration in the newspaper, I thought it's really neat. And then I wanted to try to copy it. And then I tried, and I really liked it. When I researched the history of the paper cutting, there are not too many books, but so far I searched. I think that China possessed the longest history, over 1,000 years, but also several countries in Europe are well known their own traditional style paper cutting. I'm living in this country for many years. I don't feel much like, like beginning culture like about the Japanese or Japanese American cultures. I don't think not much about it, like generally like mix, like American and then Japanese or Japanese American. But as you can see, a whimsical picture, I mix the culture like old Japanese style, like courtesans drinking espresso or something like that. I love to create the nature scenes, but since I'm a professional artist, so I'm thinking, of course, like selling my works at the gallery or whenever I have shows. So about 10 years ago at the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Fair, 1 year I tried to make and then sell the cat picture. And then it was very popular.
Aki Sugabi also teaches classes in elementary schools for all ages.
Usually I prepare the animals like, like just the black-shaped animals, easier, to cut the children, for the children. And then each children cut it out. And then I always tell them, please make your own story, own story or own picture. So they have to add something else, add to my, so always finished picture looks so different, 100 different pictures. And once in Oregon, one children had a really good idea. And then I told them, you can use anything. And then he used like a brown bag, sandwich bag, and then make a really nice picture. And then another kids can learn that time I used the pig shape, and then put the cape and the microphone, and one little cute boy said, this is Pig Elvis Presley, or something like that. And another girl put the like ring and the wing and the angel pig or something. So always I can learn from them something. So kids, they can give me always something, new ideas, or it's so much fun. So I'm really enjoying to doing children's book illustrations. It's not easy. It takes a long, many days, and then I have to talk to a publisher. But it's really when book comes out, it's really fun.
I am standing on top of the award-winning terrazzo floor titled Current, which was created by artist Linda Beaumont. Next up, we get a look at a festive and pulsating style of North Indian dance. Shub Gill of the Rhythms in India Dance School is spreading Indian dance throughout the Northwest. She mainly teaches a form of dance called Bhangra.
It's a very, very festive dance. It's a dance of celebration. It's a harvest dance. The farmer has done his good deed. He's taken his crop to the market, and he's returning back with the earnings of all his hard work. And obviously it's reason to celebrate. So he brings home gifts for his family, and of course at home families are waiting for him, ready to celebrate. And then they break loose, they put the percussion, there's a big percussion called dole. Dole goes on, they play dole, and they sing ballads, and they sing different types of music pertaining to love songs, pertaining to patriotic songs, pertaining to just the songs of the community, farming community, and they dance. And the dances that we do, they do have meaning. Most of the steps are derived from the farming community, and each step means something. And of course, some of the steps are, because it is a celebration dance, the steps are just happy, festive, joyous steps. And thus makes this dance the most festive and most celebratory, as well as it just gets you going. The music goes on, and there's not a foot in the room that's not stomping, and there's not a finger in there's not a hand in the room that's not snapping. So we all get going, and it's a fun dance. And now the Bhangra itself has really expanded. It's come across from overseas, from Punjab to here, all the way to North America.
Indians and non-Indians participate in the classes. Shubh says that she is thrilled to share Bhangra with people outside of her culture.
It's something to be shared, and it's something to be experienced. And I really ask everyone to come out and at least experience it once. And once you do it, once you're experienced it, you're hooked.
Well, that's it for our show today. Thank you for joining us here on Voices of Diversity. For the City of Bellevue Cultural Diversity Program, I'm your host, Kevin Henry.